there will be no negotiations. Putin is preparing for another invasion. The whole world is anxiously watching the course of diplomatic battles which seem to really have the potential to bring peace to Ukraine. But is that really the case? And is it actually possible to expect an end to the war? According to foreign journalists and Ukrainian intelligence, while the Kremlin unanimously declares a peacekeeping mission and readiness to end the conflict, Putin is devising yet another plan to seize new Ukrainian territories. What is happening with the negotiations, and why have the Odessa and Chernihiv regions of Ukraine come under enemy threat? I'll tell you all about this next. Hello everyone, my name is Anastasiia Husarieva. Now, together with you, we'll try to figure out what's happening around the peace process and ultimately how it will end. But before we start, I ask you to like this video and subscribe to our channel. So let's get started. Negotiations regarding a possible peaceful resolution to the war in Ukraine are moving slowly and, unfortunately, have not yet shown any real progress. Despite the desire of the President of the United States, Donald Trump, to stop the fighting, the situation on the front line remains unchanged. The intensity of the fighting remains high, and the Russian army is advancing. This is reported in a Sky News article. As noted by British journalists, there are no signs that the diplomatic activity of the White House is leading to a reduction in tensions or a decrease in the scale of Russian operations in Ukraine. Moreover, the publication emphasizes that the Kremlin is using Washington's focus on negotiations as a convenient cover. While the attention of the U.S. administration is focused on seeking a peace agreement, Russian troops are seizing new territories and expanding their zone of control in various directions. Journalists draw attention to the lack of any signs that Moscow intends to slow down the pace of the war, which in the meantime increases the risk of the conflict spreading even beyond Ukraine. According to the publication, shifting Russia onto a war footing required significant effort, time, and of course financial resources. The Kremlin has partially mobilized the population, significantly increased the share of defense spending, and also redirected large segments of industry toward the production of weapons and ammunition. Such a large-scale restructuring of the economy, according to journalists, shows that Russia is preparing itself for a prolonged confrontation. The refusal to reduce the level of defense activity, even in the event of a theoretical cessation of hostilities, may indicate Moscow's intention to continue strengthening its armed forces and, accordingly, expanding its arsenals. According to journalists who rely on their own sources, Russia is not striving for lasting peace, but rather sees a possible pause only as a temporary stage before further military actions. I apologize, not striving for lasting peace, but rather sees a possible pause only as a temporary stage before further military actions. The absence of any measures to reduce, for example, the current military activity of the Russian Federation, considering that over 700,000 Russian soldiers are involved in Ukraine at this stage, may indicate that the Kremlin is anticipating a further escalation of the conflict. The further development of the situation in Europe, according to the publication, directly depends on the content of a possible peace agreement between Ukraine and Russia. A complete defeat of Russia appears unlikely without a fundamental shift in the position of the United States and a sharp increase in military support for Kyiv. The second, less harsh option is an agreement that establishes a certain balance of interest between the parties. Such a compromise could include a temporary suspension of fighting along the current line of contact and the creation of conditions for more fundamental peace negotiations. However, in turn, Sky News notes that such an option would only become possible if European allies are prepared to move to a serious level of defense readiness. European countries will need to significantly increase their defense budgets and effectively shift their economy and society to a state of high readiness, so that Moscow does not attempt to test the limits of support for Ukraine. France has already stated that society needs to prepare for possible losses among young citizens in the event of a conflict with Russia. Germany, in turn, has initiated mandatory medical examinations for all 18-year-old men with the aim of considering possible national service. An alternative scenario, warned about by Sky News, envisions that Europe may find itself unable to influence the course of these negotiations. In that case, Kyiv would have to accept terms favorable to Moscow, which are essentially outlined in this peace plan. This would include the transfer of Donbas territories that are currently under Ukrainian control. But even such an option, the publication emphasizes, would only become a temporary pause in the war. The article notes that such an agreement may only lead to a pause before a new attempt by Russia to seize the rest of Ukraine or even to test the resilience of NATO's eastern borders, including the Baltic countries. The British publication draws attention to the strategic uncertainty, which, in their opinion, is linked to changes in American policy. A new national security strategy. It points out that Washington will intervene in the defense of Europe only if it aligns with American interests. Against this backdrop, the former confidence in the automaticity of NATO's collective defense principle is fading. Article 5, which stipulates that an attack on one member is an attack on all, is no longer seen as an absolute guarantee. At the same time, along with these international signals, processes are taking place within Russian politics and military planning. At a meeting with military leadership, Putin ordered the creation of a security zone along Ukraine's northern border. Although it is worth noting, this is not the first time he has made such a statement, and moreover, not even the first year. The liberation of the city of Siversk. The commanders of the groups, the military groupings, must continue to carry out their tasks in strict accordance with the plan of the special military operation. Thank you all, dear comrades. With this, we have finished our work. Doesn't sound like a desire for peace, does it? So according to the Kremlin dictator, this implies establishing control over the border areas of 3 Ukrainian regions. These are the Kharkiv, Sumy, and Chernihiv regions. You can see this on the map right now. At this time, Russian troops are managing to hold a large part of northern Sumy region, as well as conducting offensive operations in certain areas of the Kharkiv region, including the Vovchansk area. The threat extends not only to the border regions. According to Ukrinform and also the Defense Intelligence of Ukraine, Russia is stepping up its activities in the so-called PMR. The Kremlin's goal is to divert Ukrainian resources by increasing the risk from this enclave. Mobilization measures have intensified in the territory of the self-proclaimed region. Reservists are being called up to the units of local armed formations, and weapons are being taken out of storage. In the same region, drone production is being set up, along with training centers for drone operators. These steps are seen as elements of a strategy to strengthen Russian influence and create an additional point of tension in the southwestern direction. However, to avoid panic, it is important to remember the actual strength of the Russians in the unrecognized Transnistrian Republic. And here it should be noted that in October of this year, Ukraine's ambassador to Moldova, Pavlo Rohovi, stated that there are just over 1,000 armed individuals in Transnistria who are part of the Russian military operational group. In addition, this group also serves as a source for forming the so-called peacekeeping mission, in which the so-called Transnistrian armed forces also participate. And yet, it remains unclear whether there is any real force in this region capable of creating problems for the Ukrainian army, considering that more than 30 years have passed since the war in Transnistria. There is also the question of how modern the weaponry stored there actually is. Ukrainian intelligence, in turn, points out that Moscow is sending intelligence operatives to Transnistria, whose tasks are to intensify crises, conduct information operations, and organize provocations and sabotage. According to the main intelligence directorate, such actions are aimed at destabilizing Moldova itself and increasing the threat to Ukraine's southern regions, where the risk of infiltration by those same sabotage groups is growing. And here a completely logical question arises: what about China? A country on which Russia is directly dependent. Volodymyr Zelensky stated that Ukraine is observing increased cooperation between Moscow and Beijing in the military-industrial sector. According to the head of state, partner intelligence agencies have similar information. Zelensky has instructed the Foreign Intelligence Service to more closely monitor all aspects of interaction between Russia and China that may affect the interests of Ukraine, as well as those of European and American partners. In his speech, the president pointed out the growing dependence of Russian companies and state institutions on Chinese investments, technologies, and political decisions. According to Zelensky, there is a process of desovereignization in a number of Russian regions, including the use of resource-rich territories and the transfer of scarce resources for the benefit of China. Let us recall that just a year ago, the Chinese consul general in Khabarovsk, Jiang Xiaoyang, stated that the country plans to invest more than $10 billion in the development of the far eastern regions of the Russian Federation. Against the backdrop of all these processes, a rather clear picture emerges in which diplomatic statements, negotiations, and discussions of peace terms exist in parallel with Russia's ongoing and expanding military activity. Moscow's strategic initiatives, whether attempts to expand control in the northern directions or increased activity in Transnistria, demonstrate that despite the negotiation process, the Kremlin is simultaneously preparing the ground for a possible further escalation of the war. Friends, that's all we want to share with you for now. I hope this information was useful for you. So be sure to like this video. Share your impressions in the comments. How do you assess such plans by the Kremlin, and what do you think will happen next? And we will definitely see you in our next broadcasts. My name is Anastasiia Husarieva. Please take care of yourselves.